So a lot of today, we're going to talk about how to make these things happen, make you aware of how, in our experience, great policy maps happen, share some resources with you as we go along, and show how to do it live as you watch, and maybe try and do it as we do it. You can try to do it, go along with us on some examples. Now, we find that great maps serve many stakeholders. You obviously might have, you might be in a role where people ask you to make a map or provide a map of something, or maybe you're the person who makes that request. Maybe you make that request on behalf of yourself, or maybe you are making that request on behalf of, well, we're going to go see these folks pretty soon, a policy analyst, or maybe a business analyst, a data steward, an environmental steward, GIS analysts, CIO people, other C-level folks, and of course, subject matter experts. You know, what we've noticed in our role, when people come to Diana or I or our team or other people at Esri who do similar functions, and they ask us, hey, can you help us out with a map? You know, it's always like Christmas. It's like, okay, this could be exciting or this could be terrible. And you can't tell at first. And what we notice is we often find that our best work comes when we bring people together around the map. We do specific things to kind of get people talking and communicating and working well together to cause some awareness to expand. We want to influence everybody in that list above. And usually there's somebody who has a plan, like, we would like so-and-so to see these maps to accomplish such and such. So getting that information out there, how does that happen? Now, for us, when we feel we have a reasonable issue or an idea to map, and we have good data, or at least we believe we have good data going in, and we have access to a subject matter expert, some knowledge. If we can get those three things kind of working together, that usually results in what we call a policy map, because they reflect the best inputs from all the people involved and the processes involved, right? Like, we want to start from these raw ingredients of an idea and data and some expertise. And then what we bring to the table might be, maybe they need a little cartographic help. Maybe they've never done a pop-up before. Maybe they've never done a web app before. And making them aware of how that works is just part of the process. But I think perhaps all of us have been in a situation where we just have data and we don't know what we have yet, or we've never worked with a particular piece of data out there. There's more data out there than ever before and better access to it, but not always in the areas where you need it. And that's the interesting thing about policy and policy making, is policymakers tend to chase after the things that are on people's minds, hot topics, new issues, or old issues with new wrinkles. And so we often will react or see people react to these opportunities by making what we referred to earlier, a map of data. Let's make a map of data. So what does a map of data reflect? Well, it doesn't reflect any particular issue or idea or stance. It's just, we're mapping the data to start there. You know, you got to start somewhere. Totally okay to make a map of data. I want to be clear about that. It's not a bad thing. It just may not be the final product that you want to share. We also will often encounter situations where there's a lot of conversations about a topic, but there's no data. There's a lack of data. Diana, how often would you estimate, think back over the past year or two, how often have people come to us and they've had an idea and our response is, well,
do you have data? Or do you have a source that we can even investigate? And oftentimes it's like something that they heard on the news, or something that they read about, and it's unclear to them and to us what the authoritative data source on that topic would be. And yeah, so we call it a map of speculation, and it might not even exist yet, because if you don't have data, how can you map anything? But what they have at that moment is a lot of speculation.
Yeah, and a lot of times it'll come out, we want to map the proximity of one thing to another. And because there's sort of an inference that just having two things proximal to one another is enough. It's enough of a story to get started. And in many cases, depending on what the overall purpose is of the organization we're working with or the people, maybe that is enough to start. But in so many cases, in other cases, people come to us and they'll kind of have an idea. They don't have the right measure. And then we start looking around for surrogate measures, or we start looking around for ways to kind of visualize the relationship between two attributes to see, well, we're not saying they cause one another or have a direct correlation with one another. We're just looking to see, are they moving in any particular direction together or away from each other? And the last example, I guess, when you don't have all three elements, if you just have the expertise, what I've noticed is we will often recognize that we have a lot of experts in the room, but we don't have any one person kind of pulling it all together, because each person is an expert in their field and they want to be true to that. They want to be true to their data. They get uncomfortable with the idea of aggregating this data up into a county boundary. Well, how can you do that? Don't you know about the modifiable area unit problem? Or don't you know about this other issue? And so these are where negotiation and trade-offs are sometimes important. It's important for us, I think, to, when looking to make the right policy maps, is kind of challenge, what are we communicating and how can we do a better job to pull these things together, taking the best of each expert that's involved to kind of bring this together. So a lot of times, Diana, I think you coined this term, the map of the theory. My expression of it is a policy mapper begins to hear maps that need to be made, but no one expert is calling for it yet.
Yeah, or they have that subject matter knowledge and they draw a diagram or one of those mind maps, and that's what they call a map. And if they don't have any data, then again, what are they mapping? So it's a map of maybe academic theory or subject matter theory. And actually, I do see Paula's question here about a speculative map. Could it include future population growth? That's really interesting. So sometimes, yeah, speculation can mean what are our expectations around the future. So yeah, definitely like population projections or forecasting of different environmental topics. That can be based on all three of those, and in which case I would call it a policy map. But I think what Jim meant with, if you've just got the issue or the idea that you've heard of and you haven't engaged the subject matter experts, you haven't done your due diligence with like source evaluation with the data source, then it's a map of your speculation. Jim, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can give an example. I think we once were asked, okay, we were asked by a PR firm, we would like you to provide a map showing the direct correlation between spending on education by census tract and spending on prisons by census tract. And we said, okay, we're interested. What's your deadline? Well, we need it in 2 weeks. So we kind of had to delicately explain to the PR firm that we don't have the data that connects those two, where if they have it or they can help us find it, that's different. If someone's done a study and they have created the data, when we looked around, we didn't find any options there. The time frame was a little aggressive, I would say. I mean, that's if you're going to start from scratch and try to do that analysis. There were several problems with how do you obtain or assign spending on prisons to census tracts. Like with schools, we could definitely conceive of how you might do that, but it was a little harder on the prison side. So in the end, we recommended to them, you have an interesting idea, what you lack is data, and we can't find any knowledge out there about how this has been done before. So we offered the alternative of, let us show a map of prison spending in the data that we found. I think it was by state or by county. And then let us find the data on education spending, and it was by a different geography. And people can see the two maps side by side. That's as far as we could go with their issue or their idea. I think that's perhaps one of the examples that stood out to me. Now, the reason we chose this funnel idea is maybe you noticed it right away, maybe it didn't. But when I was thinking about how to express what our team tends to do and how policy mapping tends to happen, according to our observations, we noticed that you know, when we're brought in to kind of consult or help out, we try to detect, is there already a process by which maps and data and ideas are being discussed? And then we try to fit into that build process or that review process, or maybe there is no process. So we'll often jumpstart it by getting aggressive. We'll take the data right away. If you've got data, I will turn a map back to you in 24 hours, right? Diana, don't we do that a lot?
Yes, but that's often the first map. You know, it's just to it's a map that spurs on and inspires other questions to be answered in future maps.
Exactly. It's just an appetizer, right? And we try to explain it that way is, hey, great news, good idea, good issue we're working on here together. You have data, that's fantastic. You got it to me. Or nowadays, in many cases, people already have services and data posted online that we can just interact with directly. And that gets us to the knowledge. And that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. We are the people often who build the funnel. And I would offer to all of you on this call, think about where you have been the person who basically creates the funnel to get these data issues and people, get them talking. Let's start making maps to show them things. And by having a rapid turnaround cycle, what we try to do is create that engagement so people begin to have confidence that this is worth their time doing. Because I always try to remember, although probably everybody on this call thinks spatially, a lot of people don't. They just think that when someone says something about air quality, that whatever air quality they experience in their backyard is what everybody in the world experiences, right? People have trouble relating that it might be different elsewhere. So that's why we try to show examples. We want to get together with people and show them the examples. I mean, us building examples for ourselves isn't all that meaningful. It's only when you show it to someone and you get a reaction, usually that's when the better questions start coming, or any flaws in the data that need to be addressed start surfacing. We notice a lot that making the map for someone to help them understand their problem better, it'll often reveal flaws in our map making process. And we've made changes to our software as a result. Esri has a big commitment to something called smart mapping in ArcGIS Online, partially because we recognize our own tools sometimes can be challenging for someone who's unfamiliar with the data and unfamiliar with a particular mapping style. It might take them time to get comfortable that they could express the data in that mapping style and then hand it to their boss for review. Like, that's a very human problem of confidence. And so that's why we put a lot of energy into smart mapping and other approaches to just make it easier for you to try out a map style or a pop-up style to express the information in a certain way, and then share it with someone, get their feedback, and then continue to iterate. And by showing them lots of map and getting them involved, as soon as they start asking for changes, I think you know you got them, right? You know that they're engaged now and they're asking intelligent questions, hopefully, or maybe just asking some tough questions about what you're doing and how you're doing it, because they're curious, they're invested now, and they want to be part of this funnel to continuously improve the maps and applications that are coming out. And ultimately, we regard ourselves as having a successful engagement with users when and officials, when they start asking for better maps, we know we've kind of changed the game. Any other comments on that, Diana?
No, I think that's spot on. Exactly.
Okay, we're working on 50 minutes now. So we wanted to share this. The Living Atlas contains literally hundreds, I would say thousands, but I'll settle with hundreds of policy maps if 990 is an acceptable number. These are maps that illuminate the issue and show where an intervention is needed. You can find all these policy maps at esri.com/policy maps. And they're categorized by various topics, as you kind of see on the screen. Many of them are maps that you can plug into a dashboard for your county or city or nation. Many of them are applications that do a very specific thing, like Diana's example, going through the top 20 census tracts for solar. And you can grab those things, modify them, and use them in your own work. So if you don't find the exact map you need on the topic you're interested in many cases, you'll find kind of the style or the approach that's been taken, and you think, I might be able to use something similar for my topic. And the main, one of the things we most enjoy is all those layers and web maps. The vast majority of them allow you to restyle the cartography. If you don't like our colors, not a problem, change them. If you need to filter the data set to show just Colorado, not the entire United States, apply the filter. Or if you need to query it, use arcade expressions to modify it. We'll show some of that in a little bit.
Yeah, and in fact, the next segment is going to be some talk about policy lifecycle and then a deep dive into Esri Maps for Public Policy, that site that Jim just kind of teased.
Cool. So is it, should we check for questions and then a break?
Yeah. Anyone with questions?
I'm just catching up on them now. Let's see.
Well, I have.
Go ahead.
I've got one for you guys. When you're looking at the air quality data, for example, and some of those other policy maps, how far down does that data go? Does it go below the county level, or is it? I mean, I guess it's map dependent, but for air quality, is it down to the county level? And then I think the data was from 2016. So how often does it get updated?
That's a great question. A lot of our maps are multi-scale, and so they'll start with maybe state or county, and then as you zoom in, if the data is available, to tract or hex bins. And in the air quality one that Jim was showing, I believe it was 50-meter hex bins. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and each one is its own story. All of the items in Living Atlas and the policy maps collection that I'm putting in the chat there. This time I managed to put it in as a link you can click on. Each of those has its own description to tell you what level of detail is available there. We are kind of biased. We always try to go for the greatest amount of geographic detail that is supportable and available wherever possible. And then our pattern and practice has been to try to then re-aggregate that to geographies that policymakers like governors or senators or representatives or mayors aggregate it up so they understand a little fact about their community. If I only have 2 minutes with the mayor, I want to make sure I create a visual impression with a chart and a fact that just sticks with that mayor. They can walk around with it from that point forward to try to win that headspace on a topic.
And Liz, I see your question. She says, these are described as policy maps, but what if you are interested in direct, indirect, and cumulative effects? And so I think what we'll talk about in the next segment is a policy maps or a policy's life cycle. And so, yes, what we've been showing a little bit now has been more decision support focused. And then post policy, we can get into what were the effects of said policy. and how can we map those? Some examples there. So with that, I think
Actually, Diana, I'm sorry, it's Sabrina. I have
Oh,
a question also.
yeah, absolutely.
So when using speculative maps or making projective maps on possible future data, is there any way that I guess a client would be able to see the algorithms used to kind of calculate those projections? Is that something that's available in mapping, or it's just kind of a general loose thing that they have to take at face value?
Yeah, I think for population in particular, I know Esri publishes a methodology kind of documentation page, and so all the inputs are listed there and things like that. I think it would depend on if it's forecasting any kind of weather or climate or things like that. Oftentimes we'll look to the federal agency like NASA or
Okay.
NOAA or things like that, CDC, and what they've done. And if it's a government agency, then they have to publish their own their doc as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
It's a great question. One of the things we look for in an item before accepting it to Living Atlas, our Living Atlas contains many things we create on behalf of our user community, but the Living Atlas also contains many things our user community contributes directly. So like in this case, Lisa Berry on our team used census ACS data to create this map. And we provide links back to the source documentation. So if there's so if there are any methodology statements, you can find them. So I will tell you that pretty much every single thing in Living Atlas will have a similar description. I'll just pick one randomly, this live feed of typhoons. And it provides all the information linking back to NOAA and all about their aggregated live feeds methodology, because that turns out to be important when you're predicting where something huge like that is going. So this is something we look for on your behalf so that you can count on things in Living Atlas having some degree of documentation to get you on the trail of finding what you need.
That's great. Thank you so much.